Today I'm going to talk about the changes that are occurring to Japanese foreign and national security policy. Before that, let me say that all the presentations and discussions are very inspiring to me and very relevant to what I'm speaking today. Let me say one thing. I happened to notice by hearing some of the presentations that we do not have a good translation, a good word for translation for the word statecraft in Japanese. Especially post-war Japan does not have such a vocabulary. So I came up with one good candidate word for translation, but it requires knowledge of Chinese classics. You know that Japan borrowed a lot of elements from the ancient Chinese civilizations, including Chinese characters. It's kind of a deep literacy that was mentioned at the very, very beginning of this seminar. So this fact tells me something. I'm going to speak about the changes in the Japanese security policy, but it means that Japan is now facing a kind of facing the role of state that post-war Japan did not have to think seriously about. So let me start my presentation. Since the establishment of the Abe government in 2012, Japan has been undergoing quiet but significant changes in its foreign and security policy. This trend has intensified in the current Kishida government. This was triggered by a deterioration of the security environment around Japan, and the continuous trend is, of course, the rise of China and recently Russia's aggression against Ukraine. These have dramatically changed the Japanese perception of international relations, and the Japanese people believe that Japan has moved from post-Cold War era to an era of more severe state-to-state competition. In this context, Japan has begun to respond to the changes in a very pragmatic manner while preserving its own identity of democracy and freedom. Especially this year, Japan is the chair country of G7, and we needed to handle many important foreign policy issues simultaneously, such as Ukraine and Indo Pacific, including China, and the relationship with Global South. First, I would like to describe briefly what is happening in Japanese foreign and security policy. In the Abe government, the legal structure of the Japanese national security policy has drastically changed due to the interpretation of our constitution. We could not fight together with other countries when other countries were attacked. But new legislation passed, and now we are allowed to exercise the right of collective self-defense if the situation affects Japan's existential national security interests as well. This is a major breakthrough in the history of post-war Japan. And also, in the Abe government, decision was made to introduce so-called standoff missile capability. This is the origin of the counterstrike capability introduced the Kishida government last year. Previously, Japan did not have medium to long-range missiles over 300 kilometers or 500 kilometers. However, if you look around Japan, China, Russia, North Korea, and South Korea all possess long-range missiles, and Japanese archipelago is extended very long from north to south. And the distance from the northern end to the southern end is about 3,000 kilometers. And in particular, Japan is very vulnerable in its defense of the southwestern islands, which stretch 1,000 kilometers long. So Abe administration made a decision in 2018 to introduce Norwegian-made JSM missiles to be loaded in the F-35. So let me move on to the Kishida government. Kishida government has placed economic security as one of the key issues in its national security policy. So they passed, the government passed a legislation for increased self-reliance of Japan and to promote economic security, including supply chain resilience, protection of critical infrastructure sectors, and now discussions are underway how we can enhance our security clearances to facilitate cooperation with other countries. And about defense spending, previously, Japan's defense spending was about 1% of its GDP. In the National Security Strategy published December last year, we decided to reach 2% of GDP by fiscal year 2027 to strengthen the standoff missile capability, unmanned asset defense, and cross-area operation capability. And counterstrike, in the strategy, we decided to squarely recognize the possession of counterstrike capability, and we plan to introduce a Tomahawk missile from the United States and develop indigenous cruise missile. And Kishida government also changed its policy toward Russia. For Japan, a Russian invasion of Ukraine was the complete end of the post-Cold War world. Mr. Kishida himself said many times that it became clear that globalization and interdependence alone cannot guarantee peace and development in the international community. So Japan considered this war as a matter of its own security, mainly for two reasons. One is about the future of free and open international order based on the rule of law is at stake. And the second reason is more geopolitical. Because this war, unfortunately, this war happened at the very center of the Eurasian landmass. This inevitably affects the security of Japan. So we cannot separate two areas, two ends of the Eurasian continent. So Japan believed that if this unilateral change of the status quo by force is allowed, this would be followed in East Asia. So Japan decided to introduce severe sanctions against Russia. Japan is the only country, Asian country, in the G7, and Japan's participation in the measures against Russia, I believe, has changed the nature of the fight against Russia from the transatlantic one to one of a global character. In this sense, I think it was a consequential decision for the international community too. And as a result of this, the relationship between Japan and Europe became even closer. Let me touch upon China. And our national security strategy sets China as an unprecedented and the greatest strategic challenge in ensuring peace and security of Japan and the international community. This includes China's national goal of the great restoration of Chinese nation, broad rapid buildup of its military power, including nuclear capability, and recently strengthened cooperation with Russia. While adhering to the policy of peaceful unification with Taiwan, China has not ruled out the possibility of using military force. So Prime Minister Kishida said that mid to long-term goal of our policy towards China as follows. We need China to make a strategic decision that it will abide by established international rules and that it cannot and will not change the international order in ways that are contrary to these rules, and efforts to do so will be long-lasting, unquote. In other words, he made it clear that it is China that need to make the strategic decision. What can we do to bring China to a strategic decision of coexistence with the international community? I must say that there is no sure path forward. As Professor Zeliko said yesterday, the essence of statecraft is how. But in this case, how is a very difficult question because we are dealing with very, very big revisionist power. So maybe an important thing is kind of sense of timeline. So, and as an intermediate goal, Japan sets a goal of constructive and stable relations with China. Japan will express its concerns directly to China and strongly urge it to make responsible behaviors while seeking to cooperate where possible on common issues. But to manage the relationship in a constructive and stable manner, two things are important, I think. First, it is not good for us to be weak and vulnerable. So our national security strategy contains a phrase, new equilibrium. This is an important concept, although it hasn't received much attention. What it meant was that we should restore the balance of power, enhance deterrence, and reduce the likelihood of war. It is for this reason that Japan has decided to radically strengthen its defense capabilities. At the same time, we will encourage serious dialogue with China. It is important to communicate concerns openly. This must be done at the highest possible levels. And the second one is the unity of the allies and like-minded countries. It's very important in conveying message to China. For Japan, the US-Japan alliance is vital, and cooperation with Europe is increasingly important. And single message on international peace and stability is necessary to show our seriousness and to avoid any misunderstanding and miscalculations. Those two things are very concerning to me. Finally, let me briefly touch upon the element of international order. Japan advocates a vision of its free and open Indo Pacific, so-called FOIP. The definition of FOIP is very simple: to enhance the connectivity of the Indo Pacific region and nurture and enrich the region as a place that values freedom and the rule of law and free from force or coercion. And this vision has echoed in many countries, including Europe, United States, India, ASEAN too. And the March this year, Prime Minister Kishida developed his version of FOIP in response to the invasion of Ukraine. The background to this was that the divided response in the international community, especially in the United Nations, to Russian aggression against Ukraine, it came as a surprise to Japan, and to me personally too, that the response to such a clearly evil act was so divided. So the emphasis in the new FOIP is how to maintain peace, and the new FOIP reaffirms the kind of minimum basic principles that international community should uphold. These principles, which are written in the United Nations Charter, including the territorial integrity and refrain from using force, these should be observed in all parts of the world. And this was also discussed in the recent G7 meeting in Hiroshima. There was an interesting session called About Peace. And we invited, of course, G7 leaders and President of Brazil, Indian Prime Minister, and President Zelensky of Ukraine. And we talked about peace, and this is a kind of a contest of leaders, if not leadership. The leaders talked not only about Ukraine, but also about the importance of solving conflicts, violence, and geopolitical tensions in other parts of the world. As the chair, Prime Minister Kishida summarized the discussion as follows: 4 points. We need to preserve the principles of the United Nations, like including the respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity. The second one is we support just and permanent peace in Ukraine. Not simply peace. It should be just and permanent peace. And the third point is we do not allow any unilateral attempt to change the status quo anywhere in the world. And last point is we need to protect free and open international order based on the rule of law. So let me stop here, and I'm looking forward to a panel discussion.
Thank you. Please come back, because your elegant presentations has provoked a few questions. Japan imposed sanctions on Russia. Has it also helped Ukraine with weapons or money to buy weapons?
Weapon is a big question. But we provide a lot of economic assistance to sustain Ukraine economy. Plus, recently, our Prime Minister visited Kyiv this March. It's kind of a secret visit. And on that occasion, we provided big amount of money to NATO. for the procurement of non-lethal weapons by Ukraine.
Is NATO opening an office in Japan? Or is that a top secret thing that I'm revealing now?
It was already reported.
Yes.
So we are
That's
very
what-
happy to strengthen the cooperation with NATO in any way. And as Professor Metkov mentioned, Japan is also invited to Lithuania next month. And last year, it was the first time for the Japanese Prime Minister to attend the NATO summit.
But there will be some kind of office, NATO representation in...
With or without office.
Pardon?
With or without office,
Okay.
our cooperation will continue to be strong.
It's becoming closer. I mean,
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think so. For example, when we had a big earthquake in Turkey this year, we sent our military aircraft to Pakistan, where NATO has a reserve of some emergency items like tents. So our aircraft carried NATO items to Turkey. It's a kind of small cooperation between Japan and Turkey, but I hope that these cooperation will be kind of accumulating and creating a kind of bigger cooperation between two sides.
how would Japan respond to an increased pressure from China on Taiwan?
Our bottom line is that the peace across the Taiwan Strait is very important and should be, if differences should be solved through dialogue. This is a very, very basic position, and we are going to send this message to the Chinese, to China, and including the leader of China.
How come that G7 suddenly has become a kind of global actor?
Maybe it's all relative. Other international formula were not necessarily effective compared with G7. G7 is a group of like-minded countries which shares value. Value aspect in foreign policy is increasingly difficult recently, given the rise of global South countries. But among G7 and among G7 plus like-minded countries like Sweden, well, Australia, is increasingly important so that we can effectively address the issues of international community like Ukraine.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.